shift to the next one that we have is the IT/OT security convergence, Tara, which I know has been on your end, one that you've been talking a lot about. So if we're to summarize that, IT and OT systems are increasingly converging with physical security systems, offering opportunities for streamlined operations and enhanced decision-making, kind of going along the same lines of the last conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The convergence breaks down traditional silos, but faces technical and cultural barriers,
Yep.
which is interesting. So it's the non-blue blinky lights side of the business as well. Success requires alignment, technology, and organizational structures for integrated risk management. So can you talk a bit about the intent of that and like what's happening on this IT/OT security convergence?
Yeah, so, if you take a walk down memory lane, and I guess it was, the first analog camera was introduced in 1940. It was purpose-built, set on a separate and proprietary network in a silo. It took, 50 years before the IP camera was introduced. That's sitting on an active network. And now, not even 20, 25 years later, we're talking about AI embedded in cameras and connected to multiple devices on the edge, driving a high level of compute, leveraging where you can cloud applications, so you're not having to go unlock, a room to get to the server to see the, incident that happened. And this push to be more predictive versus reactive, to move from guards and guns to security professionals that have predictive signs, get alerts, et cetera, to building management or operators wanting to manage multiple sites at a time. All of that has created an increasingly amount of complexity at the edge, the integration of multiple solutions, and with that, different decision makers on who owns it. And so when you turn the camera or traditional access control into something that's generating data for a different use, what predictive analytics most commonly, all of a sudden now someone who's the steward of the data, typically someone in IT, has to get involved. So you have multiple different decision makers and owners, operators. So again, OT systems, so operational tech, the IT systems, which are really driven around how and where you gather and manage and protect the data. And I would offer a third one, which we just discussed, which is production. So building management solutions, CRM solutions, and how POS solutions, how a facilities or building operator or anybody brings all these solutions together. So I'll pause for a moment, make sure I got to it. But I think what you have are different cultural norms. We've already talked about it. Security industry, their job is, to protect and prevent and keep everyone safe. The IT industry is to leverage all this data and tech to drive more efficiency, other outcomes. And then the operator is dealing with all the subsystems in a building, facility, or community, and how am I going to manage that? It all comes down to where the data layer is and how you democratize that and leverage that and bring those systems together. So that's what's driving kind of this sort of cultural, I don't want to say clash. It really needs to be an integration, but it's creating complexity at the practitioner and end user level.
Okay, before I jump into questions,
Tara and I've talked about this together for quite a few years now, and one of the things how I like to help frame this is to think about this in the context of like the biggest, highest level themes that are emerging here. And to me, you've heard me say this before, but really these are fourth industrial revolution kind of themes here. And you're talking about really the move to a connected world in general. There was a McKinsey report not that long ago that talked about 100 billion connected industrial IoT devices by 2030. And I think that's what really is at play here. You're talking about us navigating a change that impacts humanity on the level of those prior industrial revolutions, right? You're talking about the mechanization of manufacturing and electricity and, computer chips. This is a fundamental rewiring of the way the world operates, right? The way that we live, we relate to each other, how work gets done. That's what we're navigating here. So when you talk about the tensions that exist there, I think there's no playbook for this in a lot of ways. But our industry is uniquely, I think, at the intersection of this because we have a long history of connecting the physical world to the digital world. And as this connected world theme kind of emerges, clearly the sensors that we manage in the security space, access and intrusion and video and all types of other systems that have traditionally been used to reduce risk are now coming into play for these additional use cases. So I think it's good. I like to describe it that way because when end user organizations can step back and kind of recognize what's happening, it allows them to have a different conversation about, well, how else might we think about our investments in technology, connected technologies that can drive obviously better, risk reduction outcomes and security, life safety applications, but then also provide value in other areas. So the ability to step back and just sort of internalize it that way, I think does help set the table for why there is additional value, going back to your theme, that can be created by investments in a lot of these technologies.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about the starting point of the convergence, where everything was in a separate system, a separate server in somebody's data center or office. And back then, if you wanted to connect two things, an IT/OT convergence, it was usually pairwise. This server and this app to that one, and there's very often a cable involved, right? If you fast forward to now,
the integrator loves the cable. So
yeah,
just
I know,
to be clear.
Not.
In some cases, some stuff.
Yeah, love cables myself. Got a lot of them in my house. Nothing like a wire.
Yeah.
But if you come to the present, everything's already on the cloud, and so all the plumbing is done, right? And I think this is one of the reasons that AI is going to have such a faster path to market or path to value, is because it's going to be delivered on top of cloud platforms that people already have. So there's no new computer, there's no new login, there's no new anything. It's just already right there. It's at your doorstep, so to speak. And so I think that even in the security industry, where I think people are still finding their way with what are the best AI applications, it's immediately available as soon as somebody figures out exactly what the right feature set is.
Yeah, it's interesting on that end. There are so many that you can turn on, right? And then they also do evolve. The rapid side of the adoption of them, the value they can create, the evolution of them, like the Sora just launching now, the video AI. I mean, I think it's out of control from what probably would have been like 5 years worth of time is like, it's been, I don't know, months on that end. Question though that I have with this, and because this feels like to me one of those that it's hard to put at some point, it's just going to flip in some respects. And we're going to be like, oh, that was the IT/OT convergence that we were talking. Is there going to be a moment like that? Right? Because we hear a lot about it. We hear about the convergence of it. I feel like it's hard to be somewhat tangible from it, of like where I can point to. You mentioned the data end of it, right? Like in these cultural things, because it's right now, it feels like everybody shows up to the party from their level of expertise, and somebody's asking for something from this to happen. And what is that this?
I would purport that we're already there.
Okay.
We just may not recognize it, and I think it takes different forms. And again, going back to the consumer of the solution, if you go to the small business, a lot of them are moving to cloud-based solutions for ease of use, so they don't have to think about the decision making because they don't have an IT person, an OT person. I mean, they have fewer resources. So cloud type solutions have taken off more in the smaller to medium-sized business. At the highest end of the business, the global enterprise and the hyperscale, they understand that they have anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 subsystems in any facility, and whether it's cabling, they want to reduce their carbon footprint, they want to optimize energy, they need speed to market, they need multiple locations to manage. And if you think about AI and the data center world build out, it's not just hyperscale, it's colos, it's multi-tenant data centers. There are data centers in every building out there, in every community, housing data. And that in and of itself is creating already an IT/OT convergence. I think the challenges have been that with the increasing risk of all of this complexity, you have exposure, you have ethical and safe use of data, there's HIPAA regulations, the regulations that vary by state, it's GDPR if you're EU-based, and a lot of people follow that anyway. And then there's an increasing risk and breach of data and personal identifiable information. And it's not what if, it's when and how many times that's happening. And so we know that. And so no one is better positioned than the security industry to understand that. But cyber security and physical security have already merged by definition and necessity.
Okay, so this is, it sounds like there's also like this massive consultative opportunity to help people transition, because it also can feel like it is so confusing in some ways, or maybe it's so big that at some respects it's hard to know what to go do in that end. So it sounds like there's opportunities to help bring people along that I believe in IT OT, I believe in the value that's there, I can see things like automation, I'm not fighting, but what do I do, right?
Here's how I think about it. I'm a stupid, simple guy at the end of the day. Really, I'm an integrator in the dirt in a lot of ways by, decades of experience. And when I think about this, if I was my original company, decades ago, or today being one of the largest global integrators, to me, the intersection of this for our industry is where physical devices come into play. Because there's all these, there is an infinite number of software use cases around, OT systems. That isn't the problem. There's no shortage of those use cases. But where I start to filter out the noise in my mind is if there's not a direct physical requirement to maintain devices in physical space, which is what the security integrator does in the security use case, then there's not a lot of value that the integration community typically provides for those areas. But this industry has been purpose-built to maintain and operate devices in physical space that have mission-critical data workloads. 365, 24/7 availability of those devices, the programs, the maintenance, all of the operational services around all those things to ensure that those devices deliver that security use case. So if you can just get close adjacent to those things where there are, physical devices that, are tangential or related to a lot of the security use cases we have, that's where I think we're seeing the initial tranche of opportunity is right there. The further out you get from that into the IT integrator space, the far less traditional value that our industry brings to the table for a lot of those use cases. Because it's data, it's cloud infrastructure, it's all those kind of things that don't require the intrinsic field service organization that our industry is built around maintaining and delivering devices in the physical world. So to me, it's the intersection of those two things around the systems and devices that ultimately can produce the same data for different use cases.
Yeah, so it makes me, as you say
More
that,
confused or less confused?
No. I'm thinking, no, it's almost like a redefinition. It's like, in my opinion, it's an application of pre-existing definitions into something that's changing that we're talking
I
about.
think that's right.
And changing the expectation. Like, so if I was to use that Men in Black thing where they erase your memory and then come back, right, you'd be like, would there be a differentiation between IT and security?
It's a really good, interesting perspective.
In some respects, because I actually,
I think what you bring up though is really important. If you flashed me with whatever the flashy thingy was from Men in Black, I think the way I would start over with it now is ultimately just saying the expectations for the way we deliver and deploy security systems are just aligned with what is a much broader OT theme. The infrastructure, the architecture, the cybersecurity expectations, the regulatory requirements, the data residency, all the things that more broadly have been OT themes. We would just think about, okay, how do we continue to evolve the way that we deliver our systems and then continue to align to those types of standards? So I think you're right. I think that's a good analogy.
yeah, so then I guess, so if I was to take a look at sort of where that, because by the definition of, in my opinion, like there's many definitions to like, but an aspect of convergence is a point of timing in a way, right?
Yeah.
So are we on the early side? Because you mentioned we're in it. I will agree. I see it on a daily basis. You all work with it on a daily basis, but sort of on that continuum of where we're at.
I would say we're at the beginning, or middle of the hype cycle, right?
Okay.
So it's been happening. We haven't quite realized the value. In some cases, we may be in the trough of disillusionment, but I do think that there is absolute value for our industry in really embracing this, because we really sit in the middle of it. I mean, maybe a fire suppression system or, just pure fire is going to be very sort of, as you say, purpose-built, but also individual. But the convergence of access control, identity management, and the various use cases for a camera solution as being intelligent and connected to, IoT or industrial IoT devices is very powerful, even with fire systems, which is one of the slower growth markets now. I think it's 1% to 2% right now. But if you attach it to things that detect smoke or heat, those types of sensors, that solution automatically adds, instant, value versus just, the traditional.
Yeah, it's an interesting. This is where I feel like it shifts to where certain aspects of what our industry has been doing eat into other areas. Like you can make hard cases into the identity management side, whether the physical should drive the logical side of it too. So you eat into that, and then into when the sensors get involved, we eat into some of the fire side, but maybe it's not in the actual piping, right? Like it's interesting to think about of sort of where that moves as we redefine the value that our industry delivers.
Tara, do you think though that the real intersection of this really just comes down to the camera in so many ways today, right now?
I think
that the use cases around that.
Yes, the camera, but not necessarily the traditional camera. Yeah. It could be an evolved access control where a door strike, eliminates perhaps the need for a panel, and there's some sort of a sensing, infrared, whatever it is, heat sensing solution. So I think the use cases for the camera are starting to spread into all sorts of different types of devices.
Right, but then at that case, though, are we, from what it sounds like, are we just a data industry then? And it just happens to be an application of a camera, a door sensor?
I wouldn't say that, because the data helps us be more predictive, more efficient, safer, more compliant. But we still have to have kind of what the core of our security industry is, right?
Let me ask it a different way then.
Yeah.
Are we a data industry that's being applied to security then?
That's an interesting question. I would say possibly, yeah. I'm looking for Steve's answer too, particularly from an access control and identity management.
Yeah, so I mean, we're definitely a data industry, but it's the irreducible physicality of our industry that makes it very special and very different from all the others. We were joking a little bit about cables earlier. One of the most important things that's happened to make it look more like the rest of IT is anything that can be wireless, anything that can be battery powered. Yeah. Obviously, residential alarm systems are 100% wireless right now. And so it's much less of an integration activity because all the integration is in the wireless protocols. You stick these things around and they go ahead and do their thing. That hasn't penetrated commercial as much because we still have a lot of different systems. There aren't standards for everything, especially in access control. OSDP was a major victory, but that's only one interface. On the other side of the control panels, there's still 20 different ways to do it. So those pieces that are all physical keep it a physical, and to your question, Lee, mean that we're not just a data industry. Going back to the convergence, though, we're seeing more interesting uses. For example, access control enabling a logistics solution. Okay, well now, is the lock or the door strike, is it part of the logistics system or is it part of the access control system? Well, it's both, really. But to the original questions we were asking about value, once you're part of how something gets delivered or how food is kept frozen or whatever your favorite use case is, now you can be regarded as being part of a different value chain as opposed to just stopping bad things from happening, which I think is a little bit of the neighborhood that we grew up in and the neighborhood that we're trying to get out of.
Yeah. Which though is a space that we can command from, because again, I'll take it, I always like to use if I don't feel safe and I'm not safe, I don't care how good the app is to order lattes, I'm not going in there to go do that. So it is our opportunity.
It is. I'll share a comment. I won't attribute it, but I think I've shared this with you before, Lee. But someone I know, senior executive at a prop tech company, said to me, you guys are really lucky because you have such a clear value proposition. You've got security. Everybody knows what that is. Everybody knows that they need it. And with my prop tech thing, I got to explain what it does and tell people why they need to have it, right? So I think even with all the other questions that we have around this thing, we do have a very clear value proposition. Everybody, you say the word security, everybody knows what it is, and people know that they need it.
Yeah, maybe we need some swag to meet our level of importance as an industry. We don't need to apologize about what we do. We need to actually go out and tell people proudly what we do.
It's true. And I always push back on that we're a data industry or we're moving to that direction. I think it just puts the goalposts so far beyond what the vast majority of the infrastructure of this industry is all about. Maybe it's, device data delivery. Like you start with a device and you're delivering the data to the systems that ultimately, attribute value, because at the device layer, the system layer, where our core expertise and capabilities are built around, there is a lot of incremental value to be unlocked. But in terms of just trying to reframe this industry as a data industry, I just find that a challenging proposition for the vast, and maybe that makes me
Most people don't look at their data.
Exactly.
No, right.
Yes.
Well, right. We produce an enormous, historically we produce an
know
enormous amount of data as an industry, but we haven't normalized it and enabled it to be used in ways that potentially can add value in other areas. So
I think that's right. Our solutions are designed to detect certain amounts of data and react and respond to that, or send off an alert or whatever. So I think that's the challenge. That's sort of why when you ask the question about where are we in the cycle, it's at the beginning, because it's a whole different set of use cases. All of a sudden you need data scientists and people who can create and manage algorithms, and then you've got to curate all the data for the end user. Someone needs to do that, to put it into something that they can consume or even manage, and then who owns the data, and how do you get access to the data? And again, if you go back to just using a building, to use Steve's example of PropTech, there's some 7 to 13 subsystems in that building that someone needs to manage, and someone needs to aggregate it and pull it all together for an efficient, user outcome.
I think Steve, you said something really important, which was just around the use cases, and we talk about this a lot internally, which is we've all grown up in an industry where the use case was a very clearly defined box that our sellers or project managers of the systems, everything else operated to deliver outcomes in this box. And as this trend has made that box have no bounds and no walls, it's been hard for everybody to really kind of put their fingers on where does this value come from. So I think in my mind, we're still waiting for some of these killer use cases. The ROI is very clear to step out of security with these sensors and stuff. And we're starting to see those. There are some that are emerging, but there hasn't been one to the magnitude and the clarity of the ROI where security has clearly established itself in the middle as being, look, we know what the value is for the organizations. That might be evolving as the technology evolves, but we know what the use cases are. The clarity in those use cases around these emerging places, I think we're still in the early innings of what is that value to the end users. And when that true hard ROI becomes clear, I think that it's going to be much easier for this industry to wrap its head around where do we play, how do we add value, all those kind of things.
I mean, if you think about AI, and back to your use case point, AI and IoT, and industrial IoT has been out there for a while, right? And you think about consumers of IoT devices, it's utilities, it's oil, gas, power, that type of thing. And then consumers, we're all living in a smart world. Our devices, our homes, our AV or smart homes, et cetera. And now we're starting to see it more in buildings and in manufacturing, from a end customer, end vertical and use case perspective. So safety, compliance, and then in certain cases retail. But to your point, it's going to be vertically specific, it's going to be segment specific, and it's going to be individual use case specific.
So you wrote down here verticals, because that was going to be my next question. Was I think if I was looking at our industry, you talked about, and some I like to talk about it, it's been predictable in a lot of ways for years, right? And we had that single value proposition. As long as we did that, everyone was like, all right, we're good. And the budget's met, value was understood. It was now a case of we're gonna go get it.
Foreshadowing of the trend here
next. And we're gonna go get it, and it's whoever touches it first or has the best price and whatever. But realistically, I like to think of it as we took somewhat of a horizontal approach to the marketplace, and the same systems that we use to do this building that we sit in, where the airport's also, or the local sub shop on the corner, we just applied less of it or more of it, but it was the same product. So we're now, the value when that same lens is put onto what's happening now, it's hard to see it. But then when you shift it to the vertical side, like the logistics when you talked about, this is where I always bristle at when they talk about the size of like the access control industry being 10 billion. It's like I keep traveling around the world meeting these people that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm not good at math, but I just add up the 10 that I've talked to, and all of a sudden I'm at 10 billion already. So then I just sort of think, wait, are we, is the lens that we're using actually in the way that we position ourselves? No, but that being said, I also see a long tail of people that are still delivering in the same way that we've always done, and it continues to go. But is it just a case of timing, of like when it flips, or?
Well, you know, that issue of what gets counted as being inside the security industry versus out, I was actually thinking about that when I was driving in. I was trying to find a metaphor that described it, because you and I have talked about the fact that so many of the market research reports that are out there are just pure garbage. They undersize the industry by an order of magnitude, probably. And you know, if you kind of think of, you know, the early days of the automobile industry, it's as if the market research guys are saying the market for tires is X, right? And during the horse and buggy era, they were only counting the wheels that were on the trailers, effectively, right? So they're focused on the trailers. They're not focused on the means of propulsion, you know, whether it's a horse or a car. And so they're undersizing it because they're not even counting the wheels that are coming out on cars. They're still just counting wagon wheels.
Correct. Well, it's also, I think, comes down to like, you can see those, right? It's like there, and it's like, all right, I just got to get this report out, right? Because the people want it. But on it, yeah. So some of it's the reframing. Again, there's a theme that I'm noticing coming here around this redefinition side.